Live episode of the Health Detective Podcast. I think we are on. It's always tough because I got to account for the fact that we're going to submit this and the episode number will be a bit later, but I think this might be about 272. Either
Wow.
way, we're in the 270s now, which is crazy. We're very lucky that I just get to do this part, and then we have a wonderful team as Scott just got to meet with today. So that's how we're able to do all these episodes. But it's great to be able to talk to you today, Scott. I have with me, his last name is Shortmeyer, by the way. I do have your bio. I've been reading those. I usually kind of record these things first and then do that afterwards. But when we're doing the live part, I think it's important that I read the bio live in case anyone tunes in with us today.
Sure.
So Scott is a husband of 20 years, father of 3 girls. He's a 20-plus year sales leader, podcast host of the Rest and Recovery podcast, longtime endurance athlete, coach, and turned FDNP with the goal to enable clients to thrive and live this one life well. Other than the father part, sounds like we got a lot in common here. So I'm thinking this is going to be a good podcast.
Awesome.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on with us today.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you and tell a little bit of my story and the value of FDN that I've found as well.
Well, and that's what we'll start with first. I'd love to hear your story, specifically when the symptoms began, because most people do not get into this space without having a personal story. Most men definitely do not get into this space without having a personal story. And most sales type men do not get into this space, that's for sure. So we have a few variables against us, and yet here we are. So I'd love to hear about what was going on.
Yeah. I did notice that in FDN. I think we need a men's group of FDN, folks. But I think, my awareness became in my late 30s because of, in a word, burnout. Mentioned all the things of my personal life. I was doing all of those good things, not wisely, during my 30s, and basically blew up. And my hormones were a mess. Went into depression for about 2 years. At the end of my 30s, early 40s. And really the root cause to that was not accounting for what I call my total life load of all the things in my life. My career was taking off at the beginning of my 30s. My family was growing. We had 3 kids in 3 years. And then, of course, I had the wise idea of getting back into running. And I didn't do 5Ks. I had to go do marathons and, triathlons. So I couldn't go, just the simple route. During that time frame, I was basically not getting sleep, 4 or 5 hours of broken sleep for nearly a decade. And it showed up, and, I just wasn't, being wise with all the things and really accounting for the total life load of the stress and lack of sleep. And so I think my testosterone was like 225 at that time. And, for all intents and purposes, I was a quote unquote athlete. Granted, an everyday athlete, and it just went sideways and learned about health from my wife. She was doing some things for our kids because of the food allergies that they were dealing with, and started getting into more of the holistic health. Discovered an MD that did a lot of that, some muscle testing, and she helped me get on a path over the next few years into that.
Well, let's be honest, and I don't know your personal story, so maybe it was something you were very open to. You are aware at this point then that you have these problems, you know what's going on, but now you have to make this transition into more natural things, especially muscle testing. I'm not condemning that, by the way. I actually do believe in that, but for many people, that's a stretch. That's a huge paradigm shift to do something like that coming from Western medicine. So was there any resistance on your end in the beginning trying to transition to natural?
Oh yeah. I mean, you're reading different things, especially start reading herbs and the stereotypical things when it comes to holistic or natural, and some limiting mindset on my side probably on what it can or cannot do. And I think ultimately what we now as FDNs face is that cultural shift of the sick care model, and normalizing feeling mediocre, right? And that, it's just normal, right? And were there valid things like I had kids and didn't sleep? Sure. But it's not normal, however normalized it's become. And getting into the natural, it was definitely different. And I didn't go kicking and screaming, but I also wasn't driving the bus. My wife was kind of the big driver on a lot of that initially. So, and eventually I woke up and realized, you know what, she's pretty smart. So I should probably listen.
It is fascinating how, I mean, I don't like stereotypes, but this one works very well in the world of functional medicine. I feel like us guys are a little more reluctant to these types of things, and women just seem to have this really wonderful, beautiful, intuitive healing side. They kind of just get this stuff a lot
Yeah.
easier than us. I can't tell you how many people, Scott, I've interviewed on this podcast. I always say the number's 95%. It's probably higher, but the amount of people that I've interviewed on this podcast, which largely has been women, that say the reason they got into the natural side of things is I just knew it was a gut feeling. It just didn't make sense. Like, so it wasn't something profound that happened. They just kind of knew instinctually something's not adding up here. They finally had their final straw, and then they're willing to go try some different things. So, by the way, for those that don't know, and I'm assuming you know the ranges offhand. I actually don't myself. I wanted to test this recently. So
Yeah.
you said I think your testosterone was about 200 to 225. What would
Yeah.
be a good range for a male at that age?
Definitely not that. I would say at least double. 500 or so, 600. It would be my guess. I know the range from a medical model is what, like 200 to 1100 or something
Okay.
crazy from a range perspective. And yeah, I would say anything over 5 would be much healthier. Obviously, it depends on the person, but yeah, that.
Just know if you're low on Western medicine range, that's usually not a great sign
Yeah,
of what's
in
going
range
on.
is not healthy.
Okay, so you have this paradigm shift. You're becoming very open to the natural side of things. You did mention some specific things, but I'm always curious, what do you think were the first, or what was the first thing that really got the needle moving for you in terms of you could see, wow, I'm starting to feel better. This is getting me results. Was it a dietary thing, or my gosh, fixing that damn sleep you had going on?
Yeah, it was the sleep. It was really the sleep. That's what was a key driver that I focused on for an extended period of time. Um, was really dialing that in and understanding some of the simplicity and how well that works. And it doesn't have to be a pill or some fancy thing. I mean, I think sleep is just bookending your day and having some focused attention to it. There were some habit changes that I probably was um, forget the term, but I was basically justifying staying up late because I earned it, right?
Hmm.
Somehow, right? And justified the Netflix binge or whatever that compounded, the negative spiral. But yeah, sleep was definitely a huge one, and realizing the cascade effect that has um, on your health and everything from hormones to physical recovery to whatever, mental state especially. Um, and so I think that's where I started to dive into it, started to do some research on that, um, discovered some different people. The benefit of doing things like this is the social webs,
Yeah.
and just doing some self-education and awareness uh, really was a key driver.
Gotcha. So before we get into FDN, I'm actually curious about one thing because I always like to know what was going through people's heads at the time. I think that's very relatable to the people that might be listening right now that are
Yeah.
actively struggling. So you mentioned for almost a decade, you're doing this 4 to 5 hours of sleep per night on average. And you almost viewed it as, hey, I'm rewarding myself from things that I did during the day. So did you have any idea at the time that this wasn't okay to be doing? Because some people don't get this. Like, many individuals are looking at 4 or 5 hours of sleep and they're just thinking, okay, as long as I can wake up and operate the next day,
Yeah.
I'm fine. And obviously, the body's resilient. It can last for some period of time, but not forever. So, did you even register this as like something that was not going to work out permanently?
No, definitely not at the time. And like you said, the famous words, "I'm fine." And just because I was functioning doesn't mean I was functional at all. Like, I mean, I look back and for a while it was a joke, and it's really not funny now. It's actually pretty sad. Is like I don't remember my 30s. Like, there's literally gaps in my memory. Like, we're sitting having family conversations with my wife about things we did with our kids, and I don't. They're telling me, and I'm literally acting like I was not even in the universe, and it's heartbreaking now to know, like, because there's only so much time we have with our kids, and um, I've got 3 daughters, and it's just an omission that I can't reclaim, and there's a number of reasons why I was doing those things at the time.
Right.
right? And I think the psychology, mental aspect of it, and some other things probably, but um, trying to reclaim past glories maybe in my youth or something.
Well, it's actually really, I don't recall anyone else ever actually describing it like that, that I've interviewed, but I had a similar thing. Now, I always attributed it to being when I was younger in high school, I had these mental health issues. I was abusing drugs as a result, and I always associated the lack of memory with that kind of stuff. But looking back, I don't know if it was that straightforward because basically from 15 to 18 is this huge blur. And I
Yeah.
wasn't necessarily using drugs yet at 15. That started later in my life. And then that's when things got really bad. But I think, yeah, with that lack of sleep and the constant stress, I mean, maybe your mind represses some of it, or you just can't form these good memories because we do know that part of like REM sleep, for example, is forming memories from the day. It's processing things. So,
Right.
my gosh,
Yeah.
if someone's never sleeping, that actually kind of makes a lot of sense that certain memories wouldn't stick. And you're right. It's not funny because I loved that last little bit of your bio. I don't know if people caught that, but you talked about this one life to live. That's something I'm really big on. You don't want to be not remembering multiple years or a freaking decade of your
Yeah.
life when it's already incredibly short. So I love the passion for that, and I definitely get that. Moving into the FDN thing, then we've already specified it's one thing for us guys to get into this and be open to this, and in this case, listen to the wife and say, okay, I need to do some of this. It's a whole nother thing to say, I'm going to go and actually make this a career. I'm going to get the certification. I'm going to start a podcast. What made you want to do FDN? How did you even find this?
Uh, you know, it started with the podcast. So I realized with the sleep piece, so many people I became aware, right? It's like you see that red car driving the street, and all of a sudden you see red cars everywhere. And so suddenly I was like, I'm hearing in the conversations the normalization of sleep deprivation, basically. And also the warrior badges of staying up late for the Netflix binges. And I'm just hearing it more and more, and then correlating how people felt. And I'm like, I got to dig into this more. And then I was like, I'm going to start a podcast, even if it's just like me learning. I'll start talking and just having conversations because I'm smart enough to be curious, but maybe not the most brilliant guy. But I was just a curious person, and then just kept investigating and decided I'm going to record these conversations, and realized so many people are just friendly and want to have conversation too, to advocate health. And then Biohacking Congress, I know FDN is pretty big partner with them. I discovered that through some of the folks I interviewed. Went to one as a media partner. Actually saw Reed speak. I think it was October of 21. And then we did a couple more events, and then it was Boston, where actually you and I crossed paths. At that point, I was another year or so into really digging into this, looked at other certifications that had, the functional health space. And when I learned more about FDN further and had conversations with you and Kimberly Bohm,
Yep.
who was there, and she spoke and did a panel with her there. So anyway, I just realized what FDN was, and the key differentiator for me was that medical director program. And it didn't feel like just habit structures, which is critical, right? It's really foundational, that lifestyle, right? We have the dress protocol, but it was more really having that competence and understanding the lab work, and not just what it says, but how to apply that to life. And then having that reach back on the medical director program, I think, was really, for me, the pivot. And I was like, it was kind of rash. It was like, all right, I'm doing this now. Because it didn't even cross my mind the first year or so, even though I was looking at these certifications. I was like, I'm doing this, and signed up within, I think, 2 weeks of doing it.
I think this is the classic like sales DNA, right? Logical yet kind of impulsive. I totally get this because it was the labs too that resonated with me because, and listen, I think both of us would acknowledge that the habit change and mindset aspects are very important. In fact, most people don't realize this. Salespeople are huge on this. Most sales companies are very big on training the mindset stuff. That's like who the motivational speakers are built for. Are these sales teams out there? We're all listening to tapes and reading books, but there's a certain time where we are kind of logic oriented and we're trying to get some objective data. We're always tracking numbers. And I think the labs, that's what appealed to me. I said, okay, I can stop just playing this subjective game of, I think I'm feeling better. I think I'm doing okay. I think my skin's a little clearer, to, all right, I did this. and the numbers either got dramatically better, maybe a little bit better, so it's not anything huge, or it got worse. I can start tracking this and make a science out of my own body. And that's what we actually kind of say in the biohacking Congress, is that we're the biohack that's the science of the self. We're using the labs to figure out what's going on with us. So that's amazing. I didn't realize that you were at the October 21. That would make sense because Reed did speak there. I was there, and Raywin, his wife, was there. So that was the first biohacking Congress I got to go to. It was really special. It was fun. A few hundred people running around there, and definitely a fun, nerdy group for sure. So I guess I realized while you were saying this, or remembered, I'm not sure, but that the podcast actually preceded even the FDN certification. So I guess once you got into this in terms of realizing what it could do for you, you seem to have very rapidly developed somewhat of a passion for this in terms of sharing this information with others and continuing learning about it, it seems, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, it was like the more I learned, I just kept peeling back the onion, and just pursuing it and learning about. I didn't know what biohacking was, and so that I got curious about that. You know, I probably got a little ahead of myself too, and was trying too many things too soon. But I mean, that's part of, you get bought into something and you just jump right in. And I think probably up to that point, I was probably an overconsumer of supplements anyway. But now I know how to be a little more prescriptive about it, or wiser about the utilization. But yeah, I just got really enthralled with it, enjoyed the conversation. And every conversation I was learning something new about the body and how it functions, and just honestly, just the wonder of it, of just how complex, but at the same time straightforward, I think, that the body is, and just amazed that, how one thing can cascade into a myriad of things, right? It's not just the one thing, and that, throw a pill at this thing and everything will be fine. That symptomatic model, it was really understanding the why, and really digging into it. And then again, to the attenuating my ear to hear things. And I think I've heard this in other FDN conversations of, suddenly you're diagnosing people in every conversation. You're not diagnosing, but we don't diagnose, but you know what I mean? Like, just like, oh, that could be an issue. That's probably what's going on. And yeah.
Yeah, it's bittersweet. You brought up that comparison of, you want to buy a red car and you see the red car everywhere. I think many people actually have probably heard of this, but I learned this from a motivational speaker, Tony Robbins, years ago. He talked about it. That's the reticular activating system, the RAS. And so it's really big for goal setting. That's why they say, like, set your goal on a specific amount of money or a specific outcome, because then you'll start seeing these things. And to me, that's very practical. I think that actually is very real. It's not just woo-woo. It's like, okay, if I wanted to make whatever, $100,000 a year, and I set that goal, I'm going to start seeing things that are going to lead me to that opportunity. Yeah. But similarly, the reason it's bittersweet is because you can do that with very positive goals. But the second that you realize some of the sickness, or you experience it yourself, you start to see it everywhere. You're like, oh, it's amazing to me when I talk to certain family members or friends that otherwise respect what I do. They're not being rude, but they're like, do you really think this is that big of an issue? I'm like, that big of an issue? I'm like, I see it in you. Like, they haven't caught it yet in themselves. Yeah. So we're trying to fight out here on the front lines and help people out. When you were going through the FDN curriculum, one of the things that we include in the cost of tuition is lab tests to run on yourself, or our lab tests to run on yourself. Now, you were already doing a lot of research. You seem like a very big doer. Like, you're like, hey, I'm going to do what I have to do. So you probably already felt a lot better by then. But I'm curious, what showed up on the labs for you that was maybe notable, things to still work on, even when you're going through the course?
Yeah, and up to that point, I was doing kind of not traditional, a little broader scope and biomarkers with blood work, but never did the stress and hormone profile and the other labs, the mucosal barrier. And I think the big one was, and it's interesting, the snapshot in time for the SHP was my cortisol was completely tanked, which, when I think back, at first I wasn't accounting for it, but I was in the midst of a very stressful time. I was training for a half marathon, and then I was involved in I'll call it a private matter, but it was like intense that I was driving this resolution, and I realized how I was stressed. It was personal and professional, and so it was really, really intense. And I think it showed up in the lab for that. And then I was surprised on kind of the result on the GI map and the mucosal, I thought I've had stomach issues in the past, probably related back to the overtraining and under recovered stuff. But I think that was another one that was a bit of a shocker currently, that I thought I had more or less resolved, or improved considerably. That it just reawakened me to that, and I was like, oh, maybe I am thinking backwards again. Is like, okay, maybe, yeah, there are some like indicator lights happening that I was kind of ignoring, even though I'm bought in and aware. You kind of help justify things or rationalize at times.
Yeah. I mean, I love all the labs, obviously we all do, but the SHP, the stress and hormones profile, in particular is very useful because I think for those of us that require that objective data to really make huge changes in our lives, when I saw that too, and I saw that my stuff was tanked, it was like, wow, you realize the weight of the situation. And you
Yeah.
used a phrase in the beginning of this episode. You said life load. I love that. Because I always say stress. I don't know if I've ever heard someone say it as life load. I think that's more relatable for the average person, because the average person, and just like we had to be taught, I almost have to teach them that stress can be, yes, it can be bills, but it can also be exercise. It can
Hmm.
also be staying up late. And they don't register stress like that. They register stress as I'm late on bills or I'm fighting with a family member. It's only a
Yeah.
few things. When you word it as life load, I think that's a lot more relatable in the sense of, okay, look at what you're doing, Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so. You wake up at 6, you're at the gym by 7, you're there for a couple hours, you're working a 9 to 5, you got the kids when you come home, you stay up late on TV, and then you do it all over again. And then you drink
Right.
on the weekends. Well, if someone called that, would you have a high life load? I think most of us would say yes, but that's how the majority of people are living to some degree.
Yeah.
So kind of crazy to think about. What are you doing now? Because I only actually have a basic understanding of this. Are you practicing as an FDN? Is it just the podcast? Do you take clients? I'd love to learn more about that.
Yeah. I mean, recent graduate, so I'm in the process of onboarding clients. I do have a couple that we're just starting to ship out lab work,
Nice.
and work with them. I've had conversations with folks and some coaching, but nothing with the labs just yet, other than myself. But that's in process at the moment.
Cool. I keep forgetting the timeline here. Yeah, obviously, recent graduate. We're talking about just kind of meeting you in person. At least I think that would have been then just last year or the year. Yeah, no, that
Yeah,
was just
last
last
year.
year that the June Biohacking Congress happened. So
Yep.
that's crazy. Good news is you have the kind of sales and business background. So that's normally the hardest part for people to learn. They can learn the health stuff all day. If you combine that, it's easy. There's no shortage of people who need this. So it'll be exciting to see what does a year from now look like for you. Is
Yeah.
there a specific demographic or niche that you're focusing on? I know many of us guys will sometimes focus on working with other men. I didn't know if that's the case for you. Like, what are you passionate about helping?
Yeah, that is my intent. I mean, I'm not going to say no to people,
Yep.
and especially back to the beginning, my wife is probably the biggest advocate, and so I mean, there's her girlfriends, and we've had conversations and friends, but largely men 30 to 60. My demographic, to help prevent folks from doing what I did in my 30s, and now I'm not in my 30s, so there's different requirements and needs, to live a long, healthy life. And so, yeah, men, and then niching down further, as an everyday athlete, focused on, the health of athletes, working with having some conversations with collegiate and professional athletes, as well as executive programs. Um,
Awesome. I think this is going to be, yeah, I'm definitely excited. I know we're getting a little bit ahead, but I'd love to review this in 6 months to a year and see where you're at.
yeah.
Because what's cool about you is I can obviously tell you're super into this and a smart guy, but there's something I've noticed that obviously we already acknowledge men are sometimes reluctant to this. And I think it's because they
Yeah.
don't relate to it. Well, what's cool about you is good looking dude, healthy looking, and you don't come across as nerdy as you probably are in the back of your head. I have my
Well,
moments. I
thank
can
you.
kind of fake it sometimes, and then I start talking too much. I'm like, oh crap, I got to shut up. And I think where this is really useful is a lot of men, they're going to relate to someone like you more, right? This, okay, sales leader guy, athlete, cool. I'll actually learn from him. And it opens up a conversation that sometimes is very hard to have. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, a lot of men, their first symptom that they ever take care of is a major diagnosis or a heart attack or something happens at work, it's like that should not be the first symptom that men are getting help for. This needs to start much earlier, and then we could have a lot better lives. And
Yeah.
same with women, right? There's plenty of women out there that do the same thing. It's they'll push until they get that diagnosis. It's like, holy crap, guys, there was stuff going on for years. There's a decade of half the time a human should be sleeping
Yeah.
before things really got out of hand for you, right?
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. I mean, the drivers are different for men and women, but at the underlying issue is similar. Seeing my wife and friends, and, you got moms who are mom's taxi and running all over, and, maybe have careers as well. And so that intense thing. And then for the men, yeah, we are definitely reluctant to speak up. We somehow have validated the lone wolf mentality, and I've got this, and you probably do, but you do need support and collaboration and partnership and an ability to, figure out when, things are not going well, and having the skill to understand, or somebody to talk to address the indicator lights. I think it started out the conversation of I just lacked awareness, right? I didn't see the red car. So putting together what I call the science and the subjective of the lab work, and then how I feel, and trying to understand, how I feel and what those things are and what's driving those things, right? Eating something and feeling bloated an hour later is not normal, but we've normalized it, right? Or whatever, fill in the blank, or that always on. I'm a, like you said, a doer. Like wind me up and point in a direction and I'll go. And I think many men are like that, right? It's just the get her done mentality. And I'm not shunning the get her done, or, there's other phrases that probably won't bear repeating, but you just get her done mentality. But you have to account for the rest in all that, right? And, mention the podcast, and not you need hashtags, but respect the rest. And I think that, to me, is a cultural issue that we have everywhere, of that we've culturally ignored rest and culturally accepted the 2 a.m. as a must every single day in order to achieve success. And it's not. It's just, I think it's not. And then you throw in all the other stuff like caffeinated and blah, blah, blah. So.
Right. It's really well said. And the causes of this are multifaceted, right?
Yeah.
Because on one end, you have a very practical thing of just speaking for society. At one point, maybe 50 years ago, one income, 40 hours a week could have provided for a family. And generally speaking, that's hard for a lot of people to do now. So you have the very practical side of working, not resting, because some people have to. And then there's sometimes others where I've been on both ends of this, right? I've been in that too, especially in the early 20s. That's exactly what it was. But there's a time now where, things are going well, and I still find myself in that same thing. So I think it's okay to want to be a guy and go achieve things and do this stuff.
Absolutely.
But we also do have to sit there and ask the question sometime, like, when does this end? When does this become realistic? Is this sustainable over a long period of time? And we have a woman named Jen Maleka, who is an FDN. She's actually the one who got me into FDN. She's been doing it for 10 years, and she's very driven, very focused, always been that way. And what she inspires me, and I try to my best to apply it to my own life. I'm still working on it, but I always hear like kind of these statements from her. So what she does is, obviously the hours in the day are very limited. Even if you didn't sleep at all, which is impossible, you still only have 24 hours. So what she realized, but she's an extremely successful businesswoman, is, okay, I can only add so much more in terms of hours, but I can make myself better and get a lot more efficient. I can learn more. I can learn to delegate certain things. And so she's extremely good at focusing on her zone of genius. And I don't know if she follows this 100% strict 100% of the time, but her claim at least is, I'm not working more than 40 hours a week, and I'm doing 3 2-week vacations a year. And you're like, well, how the hell do you do this then? How do you make more money? I'm going to get better in those 40 hours and act like that's my 24 hours, right? Because that's what's amazing too. That we all kind of do that, especially as guys. I saw this, and I love him to death. We've talked about this. My dad did the same thing. We'll just keep pushing the hours until there's no more, and then we forget that we can become more efficient. Well, if you were going to become more efficient at the 16-hour mark, just do it at the 12. I mean, still get at least 4 hours of rest, right? Do it at the 10 or the 8.
Yeah.
you can always get more efficient and make those hours that you are doing very useful. So we don't need to spend more time on that per se, but I think that's a really powerful thing. And I say it half the time just as a reminder to myself that I can only add so many hours, but I can get pretty much unlimited in terms of more efficiency and knowledge, at least while I'm here. I can keep learning, reading, studying, and those things can get better. So you can make all the money, you can still hit the goals, you can have fun, and you can have a life and have health that sustains you for a long period of time. Because,
Yeah.
man, what a nasty thing it must be to grind for 40, 50 years straight and you get to the finish line and there's no health left to enjoy all
Yeah.
the things you built.
Yeah. And you hear it a lot when people retire, not to get morbid, but like, they retire and within a few years, unfortunately pass away. And there's a variety of reasons for that. But I think going back to your point on like, there's a lot of contributing factors to burnout and your underlying why. And it's just really taking a step back and then having that healthy boundary to turn it off. The beauty of technology is it's always on. The terrible thing about technology is it's always on.
Yeah. 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 Right. We have to be the ones consciously to say, okay, enough's enough. I'm not
Right.
doing this right now because I can always like access it. And I think that's
Sure.
really the core of all the issues. You can access work 24/7 now. You can access the TV, whatever. We were made that you can only access stuff roughly, depending on where you live, maybe 8 hours to 16 hours a day based on the light. Right. And then you
Right.
have to go to bed. You got to chill out. But we don't
Yep.
have that luxury anymore. With all that said, I want to shout out your podcast and talk about some of the things that you love nerding out on there and what people can expect. And I always shout out podcasts on our podcast because the way I look at it is this is a modern form of TV. And the reason I compare it to that is because you don't just watch one TV station or one show. You probably
Right.
have a lot of things you like. So I love for other people to explore other podcasts and listen. So yours is called the Rest and Recovery Podcast. Correct me
Right.
if I'm wrong. And
Yep.
what can they expect to hear on there? What are some of the topics you go over?
Yeah, I would say four foundational elements that correlate to rest and recovery, which is sleep, nutrition, mindset, and fitness. And fortunate to have a lot of experts in all those domains to speak to, how to live this one life well. That's the ultimate mission, and how to equip people with the awareness, the skill to be able to rest well and apply it to their lives, whatever is most applicable. And so I think using that tool of the podcast to be able to listen and hear experts and how they explain it in their life, and then how you can use it.
Cool. We have been trying to shift the podcast a little bit in a positive way because what we've realized after all these episodes is, and I think this is an evolution of the space, like just the
Hmm.
functional medicine space in general. I think we're keeping more people. We're adding people at not a significant rate. Honestly, I think there's like a small percentage of the population that's really into this. I know people are coming in left and right. Yes, it seems like that. But if you go out and walk on the street and you talk to 95% of people, they can't even define functional medicine,
Yep.
let alone tell you what people like us do. So it's still very
Yeah.
limited. All of that to say, I think the people that are here, they're here to stay and they're wanting more nerdy topics. They're wanting to dive a little deeper into stuff. And so for our last bit of time here, maybe roughly, 10 minutes or so, one of the things clearly that you're focused on is this rest and recovery aspect. Obviously, that's the name of the podcast. And we could start with the super fundamental stuff. If you're not even trying to go to bed at 9 or 10 o'clock, well, you're already shooting yourself in the foot. If you're waking up to an alarm 3 hours before you should, again, you're shooting yourself in the foot. Those are things that you got to work on no matter what. There is no FDN coach out there that can fix that for you. You got to get that down. However, there are many people, including myself at one point, that are trying to do the best that they can with the sleep. They're like, I'm going to bed on time and I still wake up and I don't feel good.
Yeah.
So as you are starting to work with people more and more, I'm sure you're going to be doing the FDN foundational stuff. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
But what are some of the more advanced things maybe you've learned in terms of rest and recovery that the average person just might not have ever heard of, and they can walk away with today and not just say, all right, I need to get 8 hours. I get that, but maybe some hacks or something that can help them along the way.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's a spectrum of options out there from zero cost to pretty expensive. I think some of the simple ones that people overlook because it just seems remedial, but it's so important is light. I say bookend your day, but when it comes to habits or dealing with the sun, and people don't realize how important morning sunlight and evening sunlight, and how that triggers your whole body, and how the intelligent or innate, design that we have. I'm a Christian, so I believe we're designed by God, and a pretty smart guy, I would think, who set this up, and like
Mhm.
giving us nature to work with our body and our circadian rhythm, and how important that and things like grounding are to help with our nervous system when it comes to just getting us regulated properly, so we can have that rhythm throughout the day to be effective, like we were talking about, more effective throughout the day, and then when it's time, more effective at powering down and going to sleep.
Mhm. You mentioned about around the middle of the show about some things are actually very straightforward despite how complex they can get. And it is hilarious, right? The
Yeah,
straightforward part of this is get outside in the morning, get outside at night. Okay, you don't need to read anything, you don't need to do anything else. Just do those things. It's as natural as can be. And it will work out for you. In fact, the morning light routine was the only thing ever that fixed the sleep cycle for me. I always had issues
really.
with sleeping, even eating well, doing all the supplements. It was a pain in the butt for me trying to fix that. And after about a month of doing it, I was good to go. I could
Yeah,
effortlessly go to bed at 10, wake up at 6, and I've never looked back since. For those, and I know that we could give a whole podcast on this easily, but for those that might be either newer to the whole light thing, especially the morning light, or maybe they've heard it, but it almost seems too simple. They're like, no
yeah,
way this can be that big of a deal. You just
yeah.
mentioned this is one of the most important things to you. And I would second that. I always talk about this. So, what's the science behind, like, why do we have to get out in the morning? Even if we have busy lives, we got the kids, we got work. Why do we have to prioritize that?
Yeah, I mean, the priority to that is important, just to kind of realize circadian health is kind of a growing discussion point that I've been reading on, and realizing how the eyes are the windows to our soul, and how our entire body has a circadian clock, and each thing relies on that, and the importance of the light as being that trigger point, right? And getting out into the light, and getting the body to start functioning as it ought to. Like it has that innate intelligence to operate in a certain way. And our modern lifestyle gets it out of whack. And that's a good way to kind of reset or reclaim our rhythms,
Yeah.
and get the body in it. I've got a client before I had the FDN, was doing some sleep coaching, and that was one of the things that helped him as well. He had terrible insomnia, and every morning would go and do that, and it worked significantly for him, and really helping his health overall.
Nice. I say the same thing to clients because many of them, their sleep's not great. Certainly, they're not ready to wake up at sunrise, especially if it's in the summer. They're like, dude, that's like 5:40. Do you understand that? And I'm like, yes, I do. I always say, have you ever woken up to an alarm you didn't want to wake up to before? They're like, oh, yeah, I pretty much do that every day anyway. I say, perfect. So, what we're going to do is we're going to set that alarm for right around sunrise, like 5 minutes before. You get out, just go out for 20, 30 minutes. It's all I'm asking. No glasses, no sunglasses. And then you can come back in and sleep. I don't care. And
Yeah,
this is something I just came up with that whole going back to sleep part, because I figured it wouldn't matter long term. And I've seen 100% success rate with this within a month. So it does take up to 30 days for some. But when these people do this, even if they come back in after the 30 minutes and need to sleep, really it's just a nap at that point. What happens is their circadian rhythm starts becoming entrained with the light. And then all of a sudden, almost universally, they kind of have this day, roughly 2 weeks in, where they're like, hey, man, I woke up without the alarm today and I didn't need the nap and I went to bed
right.
on time. And it's just the body was made for this, guys. So when you give
Exactly.
it a chance to do that, that's just how it works. It's like when
Yep.
we eat real food and we feel fantastic. That's not something so profound. We're just doing what we were supposed to be doing and feeling how we were supposed to feel. So are you blocking the blue light at night? Are you fully into this
Yeah.
then? Okay,
Yeah, I
nice.
was just going to go there. Some relatively inexpensive ways to help with that is, the overdosing of blue light is what I call it. We're staring at these screens, our phones, computers all day, and it's constantly triggering our brains to think it's noon. And that's the negative about it, is that just like we're saying the morning sun sets it, we're kind of doing this morning sun perpetually with this overdosing of blue light, and not having those other spectrums of light throughout the day. And so a good way to mitigate that is either blue blocking glasses. There's a company called Wave Blocker Oh no, sorry, that was for EMF. But iJust is what I use. It's screen protectors, and you can put it on your device. So I got both, and I recommend it to a lot of people just because it's a simple, passive way. It's inexpensive, and it's just that, to me, pennies add up to dollars, right? So over time, you do a couple little things that are relatively inexpensive, and that is going to compound over time positively for you.
It's a shame that not really in our space, I think most people are open to it, but the general public, some of this stuff can oftentimes look so extreme. Not so much the
Yeah.
sunrise thing, but the second I start talking about blue light blocking glasses, this is still weird. And, I first learned about this 6 years ago, and I was just applying anything I learned at the time. And then there's people that were on it way before that. It's a shame that it sounds extreme because when you look at it, it's like this is as natural as possible. Not wearing the glasses, but blocking certain parts of the light spectrum at night. That's why
Yeah.
we call it night. It's
Yep.
dark. There's no more light. And we
Yeah.
invent this stuff. My favorite quote by Dr. Jack Kruse is that human beings are the only animals smart enough to invent artificial light and dumb enough to live under it. Right? It's like it is amazing. What a interesting thing to be smart enough to do this. And then we're like, oh, let's live under it 24/7. It's
Yep.
like, wow, like digging our own grave.
Yeah, and to piggyback off that, like the culture thing and talking glasses, the other side of that, and I think Dr. Jack talks about it, is stop wearing sunglasses. And people, you say that, and people are like, "What are you talking about?" It's just like you wear sunglasses to block the sun. Well, no, if you don't wear sunglasses, your eyes adapt. So when you're wearing the sunglasses, you're creating, I'll call it a deficiency. Maybe that's not the right term, for your eyes to adjust to the natural light and to work with, the natural order of the circadian rhythm, or the day of the sun, day to night for the sun.
Yes, that one even meets resistance in the functional space. Again, those
Yeah.
people are normally open to the blue blockers, even if they don't do it. They're like, okay, I respect you. I get it. I would do anything for my health too if I felt that I needed it. The sunglass one, people can't get over the whole style or whatever. But it was hilarious because 6 years ago I ditched the sunglasses and I put on blue blockers. So it's very interesting, especially when you're in your family that might not be. I was living with my parents at the time. I was like 21, and it just looked so odd that, like, wait a second. So you take off your glasses during the day now and you put them on at night? And obviously they're not sunglasses, but you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And the answer was yes. And so people don't realize, I mean, we're talking about the increased rates of skin cancers and burning and all this stuff. People aren't told that one of the ways your body picks up the signal to create melanin to protect you from the sun and tan you
Exactly.
is through your eyes.
Yep.
So it's fascinating when you realize how powerful that is. So the other thing too is I hear all these people complain about, well, my eyes are so sensitive. The first thing I say with that, I'm like, if your eyes are sensitive enough that you're bothered outside, how did you think you were going to make it through life? Like, if we just never invented sunglasses, how did your ancestors make it here? Do you not think that there's something wrong with that?
Yeah. That should be the indicator light on the dashboard saying something is off.
Yes.
Uh,
I have also found people will rejoice in this. I think 100% success rate with that sensitivity eventually going away. And so if you guys are interested in that, what you start with is exactly what Scott recommended. You start with the morning light, right? Tell your body what time it is. Let those eyes get adjusted. You finish with the sunset. You get outside as much as you can, expose yourself to actual light. I'm not saying cause yourself pain. Don't be stupid, but
right.
you want to progressively work towards not needing these sunglasses. And I know what people mean when they say the sensitivity thing, because that would have happened to me years ago, but it's been so long now. I just can't even. It's amazing to me when I'm standing outside with someone that is actually complaining because of how bright it is. I'm like, dude, I'm not thinking about this at all. It wouldn't even register. And I can't help but think that I'm not normally this arrogant, but I'd have to think we're the correct ones here because we weren't born with a pair of sunglasses when we came out of our mothers. So
Right.
I'm going to guess that maybe we weren't naturally supposed to have those and we should be able to see outdoors. Radical idea. I know, but to me, that just kind of makes sense. So I appreciate you nerding out with me on that. I'm sure we could talk about light forever. It's cool
Yeah.
to me always when someone brings that up as the first thing when I talk about like what's something really important to you, because it is for me. It was a game changer. My health would not be the same without it. And I've taken it, this really is extreme. The thing that I did that I'm actually most proud of with the light stuff in the same way is in the beginning of the pandemic, I camped for 60 days. And I wasn't living outside all day. You know, I went in and worked, but like even when I worked, I had the computer set up at the window. I wanted to know how good can I feel when I am outside all the time. And there were 7 nights that I missed due to lightning storms. I figured not a great experiment if I die. But you know, those 53 days that I actually got to do that. At first, it was a little uncomfortable, right? But your body getting used to this. I'd never camped before. I went from no camping to camping for 60 days straight. And so it was weird. And then once I adjusted, the biggest thing that was crazy to me, I needed about maybe 2 hours less sleep outside than I did inside, and I felt better. And I think that was just
Yeah.
because of the light, right? Because it grants you, it was summer, so I'm sure this wouldn't always be the case, but it wasn't really dark until like 9:40 here, and the
Yeah.
first light's coming up at like 4:50. So I'm only getting this like 6.5 hours of sleep, where normally I would need 8.5. I felt fantastic. I'm more recovered. I
Yeah.
looked better even than now. I looked healthier. I was like, wow. And this is what we were supposed to do naturally. And I did it
Yeah.
for 60 days, and I feel the best I ever have in my 20 something years on this earth.
That's
Crazy.
an awesome testimony. It'd be interesting if you had wearable data to like see the different splits on sleep with REM and deep sleep, and
Yeah.
how quality that was. It probably was high if you were waking up rested. The quality of sleep.
Well, and listen, Scott, I always talk about my highs and lows. So I'm thankfully doing very well right now. Everything worked out. But the funniest part is I ran labs before I did the experiment. I never ended up running the same labs afterwards because I was just broke during the pandemic. Like I was speaking at schools for a nonprofit beforehand. I went from like, all right, this is going well to wow, this sucks. And so failed experiment in that sense, but subjectively and anecdotally, it went pretty well. So maybe we'll give it another try if my
Yeah.
parents are willing to have me move back again to go camp in their backyard. That was an interesting one to explain to my dad. He's like, "Yeah, you're allowed to move back, but why exactly? To sleep in our backyard?" That was a foreign concept to him. So,
Yeah, I'm
Scott,
sure.
with that said, obviously you're on the market, you're helping people. They can now work with you. So, where can they find the podcast? Where can they contact you? And then, obviously, if they wanted to work with you, what's the process there?
Yeah, the podcast is the Rest from Recovery podcast on all the different channels. Website is Be Rested, Be Well. And then my functional health practice is called Causeway Health, Bridge to a Better You. So that website is causewayhealth.co, and you can find me there.
Sweet. Scott, thank you so much for coming on. And I mean this seriously, please, if you remember 6 months, 1 year down the line, I think you're probably going to be someone that just takes this and runs with it. I have a very strong feeling about that. So
Thank you.
I'd love to see where you're at and how that's working. It's always great to talk to another guy who's doing this because everyone has health issues. So we need more men in the space helping other guys.
Absolutely. Well, Evan, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here, man. And
Yeah.
yeah, love to take you up on that.